My name is Aubrey, and at 35 years old, I never expected to be a widow. When Edward died suddenly last month, my world completely shattered. But nothing prepared me for what happened after his funeral. I returned home to find my sister-in-law Julia and her husband already moved in, their suitcases unpacked in my bedroom. Julia looked me dead in the eyes and said, "This house is mine now. I have already sold your belongings, so get out." I could not help but laugh because she had no idea what was coming. Before I continue my story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of strong women. Trust me, you will want to see how this story unfolds. Edward and I met 12 years ago at a charity gala in downtown Chicago. I was 23 then, working as a volunteer at the art auction while finishing my teaching degree. He was 28, already making a name for himself as a financial advisor with an uncanny ability to predict market trends. I remember the moment perfectly. I was arranging a display of watercolor landscapes when I accidentally knocked over an expensive vase. As I frantically tried to catch it, a hand reached out and grabbed it mid-air. That hand belonged to Edward. "Nice save," I said, feeling my cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I have quick reflexes," he replied, with a smile that made my heart skip. "Financial markets wait for no one." That night, we talked for hours about everything from Renaissance art to his family business to my dreams of teaching art to elementary school children. Edward was different from anyone I had ever met. He came from wealth but wore it lightly. His intelligence was matched only by his kindness. Our romance was a whirlwind. Within 6 months, we were married in a small ceremony by Lake Michigan. His mother, Scarlett, was there, beaming with joy and welcoming me warmly into the family. Noticeably absent was his sister, Julia, who claimed a business emergency had kept her away. I would later learn this was the first of many slights. Edward and I built a beautiful life together. He continued climbing the ranks at his investment firm while I secured a position teaching art at Westbrook Elementary. We rented a small apartment at first, saving diligently for our dream home. Edward never wanted to rely on his family money, preferring to make his own way. 5 years into our marriage, we found it. A gorgeous colonial-style house in a leafy suburb with a big yard and plenty of space. The house needed work, but we saw its potential immediately. Weekends were spent painting walls, refinishing hardwood floors, and planting a garden. Every nail hammered and seed planted was an investment in our future together. The only shadow on our happiness was our struggle with infertility. After 3 years of trying naturally, we consulted specialists who ran countless tests. The diagnosis was devastating. I had severe endometriosis that made pregnancy unlikely. We discussed adoption and surrogacy, but decided to take some time to process before making any decisions. "Family is more than biology," Edward would say, holding me close on the nights I cried. "We have each other, and that is enough. The rest will fall into place." Throughout these challenges, my relationship with Edward only deepened. He never made me feel like a lesser of a woman because I could not bear children. Instead, we channeled our nurturing instincts elsewhere. I poured extra love into my students, while Edward mentored young financial analysts. His family dynamics were complicated. The Harrington family had built their wealth over generations through real estate and later diversified into various investments. Edward's father, Thomas, had been a stern, demanding man who expected his children to earn their place in the family business. Edward had worked diligently to prove himself, while Julia had taken a different approach, relying on charm and manipulation to secure her position. Scarlett, Edward's mother, became like a second mother to me. After Thomas died 6 years ago, she moved to a smaller home but remained active in community work and family matters. She often told me how happy she was that Edward had found me, saying I brought the best in her son. Julia always resented how easily things came to Edward, Scarlett confided once over tea. He inherited his father's head for business, but my compassion. Julia is all ambition with none of the ethics. Julia married Carter about 8 years ago. He came from old money but had little of his own, having frittered away most of his inheritance on failed ventures. The four of us rarely socialized together. When we did, Julia would make subtle digs about our modest lifestyle or my career as just a teacher. The last 2 years of our marriage, Edward spent increasing hours in his home office. He explained he was working on a special project that required discretion. I respected his privacy, though sometimes I would bring him coffee and catch glimpses of spreadsheets and documents. He seemed troubled at times, but would quickly smile and change the subject when I asked what was wrong. Just some family business matters, he would say. Nothing for you to worry about. 3 months before his death, Edward updated his life insurance and asked me to meet with his attorney, Daniel, to review our wills. I thought it was just responsible financial planning. I had no idea he was preparing for a storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. The day Edward died began like any other Tuesday. He kissed me goodbye at 7:30 in the morning, promised to pick up Thai food for dinner, and headed to his downtown office. I went to school, teaching my third graders how to create papier-mâché sculptures. Just after lunch, during my planning period, my phone rang. It was Sylvia, Edward's assistant. Aubrey, her voice trembled. Edward collapsed during a meeting. The paramedics are taking him to Northwestern Memorial. It looks serious. You need to come now. The world tilted on its axis. I remember dropping my coffee mug, ceramic shards scattering across the floor like my suddenly fractured life. My principal drove me to the hospital after seeing the color drain from my face. The 20-minute ride felt like hours as we navigated Chicago traffic, my hands shaking so badly I could barely text Scarlett. When I arrived at the emergency room, I knew immediately from the doctor's expression. Edward had suffered a massive heart attack. Despite their best efforts, he was gone. At 40 years old, my husband had simply ceased to exist. There was likely an undiagnosed congenital heart condition, the doctor explained gently. Sometimes these things show no symptoms until it's too late. I collapsed into a chair, unable to process the words. Edward had mentioned chest pain occasionally over the past year, but we both dismissed it as stress or indigestion. He was young, fit, careful with his diet. Heart attacks happen to older men, not vibrant 40-year-olds with their whole lives ahead of them. Scarlett arrived 30 minutes later, her face ashen with grief. We held each other, two women united in loving the same man. She had already lost a husband, and now her son. The injustice of it seemed too great to bear. Julia and Carter appeared an hour after that. While Scarlett and I were still sobbing in each other's arms, Julia immediately asked to see Edward's personal effects. Her eyes were dry, her demeanor businesslike. "I need his keys and phone," she announced to the nurse. "As his sister, I have responsibilities to the family." I was too distraught to argue as she collected Edward's belongings, including his expensive watch and wallet. She made a show of comforting Scarlett, but barely acknowledged me except to ask if I had contacted Edward's attorney yet. "Daniel called me already," I said numbly. "He mentioned urgent matters, but I cannot think about that right now." Julia's eyes narrowed slightly. "What matters did he specify?" "I don't know, and I cannot talk about this now. My husband just died." The next 3 days passed in a blur of grief and surreal administrative tasks, death certificates, funeral arrangements, obituary wording. I moved through it all like a ghost, sleeping in fits and starts, eating only when Scarlett insisted. Julia suddenly appointed herself funeral director, overriding my wishes at every turn. The simple, intimate service I wanted became an elaborate affair with business associates I barely knew. She insisted on an open casket despite my objections, selected flowers Edward would have hated, and even changed the music selections. "The Harrington family has traditions," she said dismissively when I protested. "Edward would want things done properly." Daniel called twice more, his tone increasingly urgent, but I deferred the conversation until after the funeral. I could not bear to discuss wills and assets while my husband's body was not yet buried. The funeral itself was a blur of black clothes and pitying glances. I stood at the graveside, my legs threatening to buckle as they lowered Edward's casket into the ground. Scarlett held my hand on one side, my best friend Vanessa on the other. Julia stood across from us, her expression unreadable, as she tossed a white rose onto the casket. Later at the reception at Scarlett's house, I overheard Julia talking to Carter. "Once the will is read, things will be put right. The house should revert to family ownership now that Edward has no heirs." I walked away, unable to process what she meant. All I wanted was to return home, to curl up in the bed Edward and I had shared, to smell his pillow while I still could. After the funeral reception, I was emotionally and physically exhausted. Vanessa offered to stay another night, but I insisted I needed some time alone in my home to process everything. She reluctantly agreed, making me promise to call if I needed anything. I drove home in a daze, pulling into our driveway just as the sun was setting. The first sign something was wrong was the unfamiliar luxury SUV parked in my spot. Then I noticed the living room lights were on, though I had definitely turned everything off that morning. With growing unease, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The furniture had been rearranged. Edward's favorite leather armchair was gone, replaced by an ornate antique I recognized from Julia's house. Family photos had been removed from the mantel, and the air smelled of unfamiliar perfume. "Finally decided to show up, did you?" Julia's voice came from the kitchen doorway. She stood there holding a glass of wine, my wine, from the collection Edward and I had built together. "What are you doing in my house?" I asked, too shocked to be angry yet. "Correction, the Harrington family house," she said smoothly. "Carter and I have moved in." As if on cue, Carter appeared from upstairs, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Aubrey, we thought you might appreciate some time away from here. Too many memories." "You thought wrong," I said, finding my voice. "This is my home. Please leave." Julia laughed, a cold sound without humor. "I'm afraid that's not happening. This property belongs to the Harrington Family Trust, now that Edward is gone without children. Surely he explained this to you." "That's ridiculous," I said. "We bought this house together. My name is on the deed." "A technicality," Julia waved dismissively. "Dad always intended the family properties to remain with blood Harringtons. Edward knew this." I walked further into the house, noticing more changes. My artwork was missing from the walls. The antique sideboard Edward had refurbished for our anniversary was gone. "Where are my things?" I demanded. "I've already sold some of the less significant pieces," Julia said casually. "The rest are in storage until you arrange to collect them. I kept the list here somewhere." She rifled through a drawer that once held our takeout menus. "You sold my possessions?" I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "The less valuable ones, yes. The art pieces and antiques belong to the family anyway." She handed me a hastily scribbled list. "You can take your personal items and clothing." My hands trembled as I looked at the list. My grandmother's china marked as donated. Wedding gifts labeled as sold. Family photos described as discarded. "This is illegal," I said. "You cannot just move in and sell my things." Julia's expression hardened. "Look at this." She pulled out a yellow document from her handbag. "This is Dad's original will from 20 years ago. It clearly states that all family properties return to the trust if a Harrington dies without issue." I glanced at the document. It was indeed Thomas Harrington's will, but it had obviously been superseded by newer documents after his death 6 years ago. "This is meaningless," I said. "Your father's estate was settled years ago. This house was purchased after his death with our money. Money Edward earned working for the family business. Money that was rightfully part of his inheritance." Carter cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should discuss this with lawyers present." "There's nothing to discuss," Julia snapped. "Aubrey was just leaving, weren't you, Aubrey?" I stood my ground. "This is insane. I'm not going anywhere." Julia's face transformed into something ugly. "Let me make this absolutely clear. You failed at the one thing Edward needed from you. You couldn't give him children. You have no claim to the Harrington legacy. This house and everything in it belongs to the family now." Her cruelty took my breath away. 5 years of pain about our infertility struggles thrown in my face on the day I buried my husband. "How dare you?" I whispered. "The truth hurts, doesn't it?" Julia stepped closer. "Edward confided in me how disappointed he was. Why do you think he spent so much time at the office? He was avoiding coming home to you." Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Then why did he never change the old family will? He knew what would happen when he died." She signaled to someone I hadn't noticed. A man in a security uniform stepped from the shadows of the dining room. "This is Frank. He'll escort you out if necessary. I've already filed a legal claim with the family attorney. Until it's resolved, we have as much right to be here as you do." Outmatched and overwhelmed, I retreated to the master bedroom to collect some essentials, only to find Julia and Carter had already claimed it. My clothes were stuffed in garbage bags in the guest room. My jewelry box had been emptied except for the few costume pieces I owned. Even Edward's wedding ring, which the hospital had returned to me, was missing from my purse. As I hastily packed a suitcase, my phone rang. It was Scarlett, sobbing. "Aubrey, Julia has banned me from visiting Edward's grave. She says as executor she controls all access to family plots. She changed the cemetery gate code. My own son, and I cannot even bring him flowers." "Scarlett, listen to me," I said, trying to stay calm for her sake. "Julia has lost her mind. She and Carter have moved into my house and claim it belongs to them now. They've sold or stored most of my possessions." "Oh my God," she gasped. "I was afraid of this. Edward warned me she might try something, but this is beyond what even he imagined." "Edward knew?" I asked, confused. "Not now, dear. Not on the phone. Where will you go? To Vanessa's?" "I guess, just temporarily, until I figure this out." "Good. Stay safe. I'll call Daniel first thing tomorrow." As I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, Julia watched with satisfaction. "One more thing," she said. "I'll need your house keys." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're stealing my home and you expect me to hand over my keys?" "It's not stealing when it's rightfully ours," she replied coldly. "The keys, please." I dropped them on the floor at her feet and walked out of my own front door, not knowing if I would ever return. Vanessa was horrified when I arrived at her apartment with one suitcase and a story that sounded too bizarre to be true. She poured me a strong drink and called her brother, who happened to be a police officer. "Unfortunately, this is a civil matter," he explained, after hearing my story. "Since her name is on documents, even outdated ones, and she's a family member, the police can't simply remove her. You'll need an emergency court order. I spent a restless night on Vanessa's sofa bed, alternating between tears and fury. First thing in the morning, I called Daniel Woods, Edward's attorney. His response was immediate. "I've been trying to reach you," he said urgently. "Edward left specific instructions in case anything happened to him. Can you come to my office right away?" An hour later, I sat across from Daniel in his downtown office. He was in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for meticulous attention to detail. Edward had trusted him implicitly. "First, let me express my deepest condolences," Daniel began. "Edward was not just a client, but a friend." "Thank you," I said automatically. "Daniel, Julia has taken over my house. She claims it belongs to the family trust now that Edward is gone." Daniel frowned. "That's completely false. Edward was very clear about his wishes. He updated his will just last month." My head snapped up. Last month? Why? "I think it's better if Edward explains himself," Daniel said cryptically. He unlocked a drawer and removed a sealed envelope with my name written in Edward's familiar handwriting. "He asked me to give you this if anything happened to him." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest Aubrey, if you are reading this, the worst has happened, and I'm so sorry to leave you alone to face what comes next. I hope to resolve the situation while I'm alive, but if I can't, I needed to ensure you were protected. For the past year, I've been investigating financial irregularities in the family business. What I discovered shocked me. Julia has been systematically embezzling from the company for at least 10 years, possibly longer. Millions of dollars diverted through shell companies, falsified invoices, manipulated accounts. When I confronted her 3 months ago, she threatened to destroy you if I exposed her. I've been gathering evidence to present to the board and law enforcement, but I needed to make sure you were safe first. In my office, behind the painting of Lake Michigan, there is a wall safe. The combination is our anniversary date. Inside, you'll find a USB drive with all the evidence I've collected, including recordings of Julia's threats. I've updated my will to ensure everything I own passes directly to you, with provisions for Scarlett's care. There is no family trust claim on your house whatsoever. Trust Daniel. Trust my mother. Do not trust Carter. He knows what Julia has been doing and has benefited from it, though I believe he's more weak than malicious. I love you more than I can express. You were the best thing in my life. Always yours, Edward." I stared at the letter, unable to speak. Daniel waited patiently as I processed his bombshell. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew he might die?" "Edward had concerns about his health," Daniel admitted. "He mentioned chest pains, dizzy spells. He wanted everything in order just in case." "And Julia, did he tell you what she did?" Daniel nodded gravely. "Not in detail, but enough that I understood the severity of it. The updated will is very specific. Everything Edward owned passes directly to you, with provisions for Scarlett's care. There is no family trust claim on your house whatsoever." "But she's already there, with security guards. She sold my possessions." "That's theft and breaking and entering," Daniel said firmly. "We'll file for an emergency injunction today. But first, we need to secure that USB drive. It's your best leverage." Vanessa drove me to my house during Julia's known lunch hour. We parked down the street and approached cautiously. As Edward had feared, the locks had been changed. Fortunately, in our renovation enthusiasm, we had installed a hidden key in a false rock by the garden shed. The house was empty when we entered through the back door. I moved quickly to Edward's office, finding it largely untouched. Julia had probably been too busy selling my belongings to investigate this room yet. The painting of Lake Michigan still hung on the wall. Behind it, just as Edward described, was a small wall safe. My hands shook as I entered our anniversary date. The safe swung open, revealing several items. the USB drive, an envelope of cash, our passports, and a small box containing Edward's grandfather's pocket watch that I thought Julia had taken from the hospital. We were about to leave when I noticed Edward's laptop was still in his desk drawer. I grabbed it too, knowing it might contain additional information. Back at Vanessa's apartment, I plugged in the USB drive. It contained hundreds of files, meticulously organized, financial records showing money transfers to offshore accounts in Julia's name, emails where she authorized fraudulent transactions, photos of documents with forged signatures. Most damning of all was an audio recording of Julia threatening Edward when he confronted her. "If you tell anyone about this, I will make sure Aubrey loses everything," her voice snarled from the computer speakers. "The house, her reputation, her job. I have friends everywhere, Edward. Cross me and you'll both regret it." I also discovered emails between Edward and the family company's board members, laying out his concerns in careful, measured language. He had been building a case, gathering allies, preparing to expose Julia at the upcoming annual board meeting. But his heart gave out before he could finish what he started. That afternoon, Scarlett called. "Aubrey, I found something you should see. Old family photos and letters. They provide context for what's been happening. Can you come over?" At Scarlett's house, she showed me a collection of family memorabilia spanning decades. Photos of Edward and Julia as children showed a pattern. In every picture, Julia was trying to take whatever Edward had, his toys, his awards, his place at their father's side. Thomas favored Edward, Scarlett explained sadly, not because he loved Julia less, but because Edward had a natural talent for business. Julia resented it deeply. When Thomas died and left Edward in charge of significant portions of the company, something in Julia broke. She felt cheated. "That doesn't justify stealing millions," I said. "Of course not," Scarlett agreed. "Nothing justifies what she's done, especially not to you after losing Edward." Among the letters was correspondence between Edward and his father from years ago, discussing the future of the company. Thomas explicitly stated that family homes purchased with personal funds were never part of the business assets. Julia's claim about the house was completely fabricated. Armed with this knowledge and Edward's evidence, I returned to Daniel's office. He had already filed for an emergency hearing and was preparing to request a criminal investigation. "This goes beyond a family dispute," he said grimly. "This is serious criminal fraud. The company board needs to see this evidence immediately." The next morning, I received a certified letter from Julia's attorney claiming that as Edward's next of kin, she was challenging the validity of any will leaving assets to me. She alleged I had exerted undue influence over Edward during a period of diminished capacity. "This is absurd," I told Daniel over the phone. "Edward was of completely sound mind until the moment he died." "It's a delay tactic," Daniel explained. "She's trying to maintain control of the assets while the case drags through court. Meanwhile, she can continue liquidating what she can get her hands on." That same day, I discovered Julia had changed the locks on our safe deposit box and emptied it of valuable jewelry that had belonged to my mother. When I confronted the bank manager, he apologetically showed me paperwork with what appeared to be my signature, authorizing Julia as a co-signatory. The signature was clearly forged. My phone began ringing with calls from friends and distant relatives, all asking strange questions. Had Edward and I been having marital problems? Was it true I had refused to have children? Had I known about Edward's other relationships? Julia was spreading vicious rumors, attempting to paint me as a gold digger who had trapped Edward in an unhappy marriage. The situation grew worse when I tried to return to work. The principal called me into her office with a troubled expression. "Aubrey, we've received some concerning calls about your stability," she said carefully. "A woman identifying herself as your sister-in-law expressed worry that you might not be emotionally equipped to be around children right now." "She's trying to destroy my life," I said, fighting back tears. "None of what she's saying is true." I believe you, my principal assured me, but district policy requires I place you on paid leave until this is resolved. I'm so sorry. Without my home, many of my possessions, and now temporarily without my job, I felt Julia tightening a noose around my life. That evening, I received threatening messages from her lawyer, warning that if I pursued claims against her, she would reveal information that would damage my professional reputation permanently. The next day, Vanessa and I drove past my house to find Julia had hired private security guards who stopped us at the end of the driveway. The gardens Edward and I had lovingly planted were being torn up for what looked like a pool installation. "You can't even come onto the property without permission from Mrs. Harrington," the guard informed us. "I am Mrs. Harrington," I said through gritted teeth. "Not according to my employer," he replied stonily. Later that week, Scarlett called me in a panic. Julia was here with her lawyer. She demanded I sign papers giving her authority over Thomas's remaining assets. When I refused, she threatened to contest my competency and have me placed in assisted living. I rushed to Scarlett's home to find her shaken but resolute. "I won't give in to her bullying," she declared. "Thomas would be appalled at what she's become." While I was there, Carter called asking to meet privately. Against Scarlett's advice, I agreed to see him at a coffee shop. "I can't stay long," he said nervously, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Julia to appear. "You need to know that Julia has gone too far. I never agreed to throwing you out of your own home." "Yet you're still living there," I pointed out coldly. He had the grace to look ashamed. "I'm trying to mitigate the damage. She wanted to throw away all your personal mementos. I've been secretly storing things I know must be important to you." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because she's forging documents, not just signatures on bank forms. She's creating backdated company records, fake board minutes, even a fraudulent codicil to Edward's old will. She has someone inside the records office helping her." "You need to go to the police," I urged. Carter paled. "You don't understand. She has things on me too. Financial improprieties I was involved in. She'll make sure I go down with her." "Then help me anonymously," I suggested. "Tell me where to look, what to watch for." He slid a folded paper across the table. "These are the dates and document numbers of records she's altered, the name of her contact at the records office, account numbers for the offshore transfers." He stood to leave. "I was never here. You never saw me." The next day brought another blow. Scarlett was hospitalized with chest pains after a confrontation with Julia at the family mausoleum. Julia had changed the locks there, too, barring Scarlett from visiting her husband's and son's resting places. "The doctor says it was stress-induced angina," Vanessa reported after visiting Scarlett. "She'll recover, but she needs to avoid further confrontations." By now, word of the dispute had spread through the extended family. People began taking sides. Those who benefited from Julia's position in the company supported her. Others who had witnessed her manipulation over the years rallied behind me and Scarlett. Sunday dinner at Cousin George's house devolved into a shouting match when Julia's allegations were challenged by Edward's childhood friend Simon, who knew the truth of our marriage. Through it all, Daniel worked tirelessly on the legal case, filing motions to freeze assets, submitting evidence of Julia's forgeries, and pushing for criminal charges. But the wheels of justice turned slowly, while Julia's destruction of my life accelerated. The final straw came when Julia somehow gained access to my email account and sent resignation letters to my school and to the children's art therapy program where I volunteered. By the time I discovered and disputed these messages, the damage to my professional relationships was significant. "We need to end this," I told Daniel during an emergency meeting. "I can't keep playing defense while she dismantles everything I care about." The hearing is scheduled for next week. Meanwhile, I've been in contact with the company board members Edward had reached out to. They've quietly authorized a forensic audit based on the evidence you provided. Next week might be too late for Scarlett. The stress is literally killing her. Daniel's expression softened. There's one other option. Edward left a sealed letter to be opened only under specific circumstances. I think those circumstances have arrived. The morning of the emergency court hearing arrived with a sense of foreboding. I had barely slept, going over my testimony with Daniel until past midnight. Scarlett had been released from the hospital but was too weak to attend. She gave me her wedding ring to wear for strength. "Thomas gave me this 50 years ago," she said, pressing it into my palm. "It has survived worse crises than Julia." The courtroom was tense as Julia and Carter arrived with their attorney, a shark-like man named Victor Lawson, known for aggressive tactics. Julia looked confident in an expensive suit, greeting family members in the gallery as if arriving for a victory celebration. When the judge entered, Daniel requested a brief delay. "Your Honor, we have just received critical evidence that bears directly on this case. Representatives from Harrington Investments are en route and have requested the opportunity to address the court." Julia's smug expression faltered slightly. The judge granted a 30-minute recess, during which Julia huddled intensely with her attorney, casting suspicious glances my way. When court resumed, 3 stern-faced men in business suits had joined us. I recognized them as senior board members of the family company. The oldest, Walter Davidson, had been Thomas Harrington's closest friend and advisor. "Your Honor," Daniel began, "before addressing the specific claims regarding the Harrington residence, we believe it's essential to establish context for Mrs. Julia Miller's actions and credibility." Julia shifted uncomfortably as Daniel approached with Edward's USB drive and laptop. "Evidence has come to light that Mrs. Miller has been systematically embezzling from Harrington Investments for over a decade. The late Edward Harrington discovered this criminal activity and was preparing to present his findings to the board and law enforcement when he tragically passed away." Victor Lawson jumped to his feet. "Objection! These unsubstantiated allegations are completely irrelevant to the matter of property ownership before the court." "On the contrary," Daniel countered smoothly, "they establish a pattern of fraudulent activity and directly relate to Mrs. Miller's current claims on my client's home." The judge allowed Daniel to continue. For the next hour, he methodically presented Edward's evidence: financial records showing millions diverted to accounts Julia controlled, emails where she gave instructions for falsifying invoices, the recording of her threatening Edward and me. Julia's face transformed from confidence to rage to fear as the evidence mounted. When the audio of her threats played, several family members gasped. Carter stared at the floor, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. "Furthermore," Daniel continued, "we have evidence that Mrs. Miller has engaged in breaking and entering, theft of personal property, forgery of multiple documents, and filing false reports with financial institutions. She has sold property belonging to my client, barred family members from visiting grave sites, and engaged in slander and defamation to damage Mrs. Aubrey Harrington's personal and professional reputation." Victor Lawson tried repeatedly to object, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge's expression grew increasingly grave. Walter Davidson approached the bench. "Your Honor, on behalf of Harrington Investments, I can confirm that our preliminary internal audit has corroborated these allegations. We have already frozen all company accounts Mrs. Miller had access to and are cooperating with federal authorities on a full investigation." Julia finally broke. "This is a conspiracy," she shouted, rising from her seat. "Edward was trying to push me out. He always got everything: the company, father's approval, mother's love. That house should have been mine." "Mrs. Miller, control yourself," the judge warned. "The house was purchased with funds my client and her husband earned. It was never company property or part of any family trust. I have here the original deed and mortgage documents, showing it was acquired years after Thomas Harrington's death, with no connection to family assets." The judge examined the documents carefully. "These appear to be in order. Mrs. Miller, do you have documentation supporting your claim to this property?" Julia's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she pushed him away. My father always intended family properties to stay with blood Harringtons. She can't have children. She has no right to our legacy. A murmur ran through the courtroom at this cruel statement. The judge's expression hardened. Mrs. Miller, not only do I see no valid legal claim to the property in question, but your actions appear to constitute several serious crimes. I am granting the emergency injunction ordering you to vacate the property immediately and return all removed items. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting Mrs. Harrington or entering the property under any circumstances. Julia's face contorted with rage. This isn't over. Actually, it is, came a voice from the back of the courtroom. 2 police officers entered accompanied by a woman in a dark suit who displayed an FBI badge. Julia Miller, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and financial crimes across state lines. You have the right to remain silent. As Julia was being handcuffed, her attorney tried to intervene. The FBI agent simply handed him a warrant. We have a search warrant for her residence and office. Additional charges may be forthcoming. Julia's final glare at me as she was led away held a lifetime of bitterness and rage. Carter remained seated, his head in his hands. As the courtroom cleared, Walter Davidson approached me. Aubrey, Edward spoke highly of you. He was building a case against Julia for months. The board resisted investigating his claims initially, not wanting to believe a Harrington could betray the family this way. When he died, we feared the evidence died with him. He made sure it didn't, I said softly, clutching Edward's letter in my pocket. The company owes you a debt of gratitude, Walter continued. If there's anything we can do, just make sure Scarlett is taken care of. I replied. She suffered enough. Outside the courthouse, Carter approached hesitantly. Aubrey, I want you to know I had no idea how far Julia would go. The things she said about you and Edward were lies. Your marriage was what ours should have been. You stood by while she threw me out of my own home, I reminded him. I know. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. I've already moved my things out of your house. He handed me a key. The security guards have been dismissed. I saved what I could of your personal items. I took the key without thanks. Whatever sympathy I might have felt for Carter was overshadowed by his cowardice when it mattered most. The weeks following Julia's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and damage control. She faced multiple federal charges for the embezzlement scheme, with additional state charges for the break-in, theft, and forgery. Despite her attorney's efforts to secure bail, the judge deemed her a flight risk due to the overseas accounts and her demonstrated disregard for the law. Carter filed for divorce and cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. His testimony revealed the extent of Julia's crimes stretched back further than even Edward had discovered. While Carter would face consequences for his role, his cooperation significantly reduced his potential sentence. Reclaiming my home was both healing and heartbreaking. Many of my possessions were gone forever, sold to unwitting buyers across the country. The gardens had been partially destroyed, and Julia had painted several rooms in garish colors out of spite. But the structure itself, the home Edward and I had lovingly created, remained intact. Scarlett moved into the guest house on my property after her doctor advised against living alone. Her presence was a comfort to both of us. Together, we sorted through Edward's belongings, sharing stories and tears as we decided what to keep, donate, or store. Edward always said you were our anchor, Scarlett told me one evening as we sorted through photo albums. When Thomas died, Edward struggled with the responsibility suddenly thrust upon him. Then he would come home to you and remember what truly mattered. The financial aftermath was complicated but ultimately resolved in my favor. Edward's life insurance policy provided substantial security. The company board, eager to make amends for not taking Edward's concerns seriously enough, ensured I received the full value of Edward's company shares and pension. With Daniel's help, I established the Edward Harrington Foundation, dedicated to providing legal assistance to widows facing property disputes and financial fraud. The foundation quickly gained support from Edward's former colleagues and clients who respected his integrity. My journey of healing was neither quick nor linear. Some days the weight of grief and betrayal felt unbearable. I joined a support group for young widows, finding solace in sharing experiences with others who truly understood. Therapy helped me process the trauma of not only losing Edward, but facing Julia's cruelty immediately after. 3 months after the court hearing, I was ready to return to teaching. My principal welcomed me back warmly, and my students' enthusiasm for art provided a welcome distraction from lingering legal matters. Creating beauty alongside children who saw the world with such open hearts proved profoundly therapeutic. The criminal trial of Julia Harrington Miller became a minor sensation in financial circles. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including Edward's meticulous documentation. Julia's defense strategy of blaming Edward backfired spectacularly when board members testified about his reputation for integrity. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 10 years. The judge ordered restitution of the stolen funds, ensuring Julia would emerge from prison with nothing. Scarlett and I attended the sentencing together, not out of vindictiveness, but to close that chapter definitively. Julia refused to look at us, staring straight ahead as the judge delivered the sentence. As she was led away, I felt no joy, only relief that her ability to harm others was finally curtailed. A year after Edward's death, I stood at his grave with fresh flowers. The pain had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something I could carry without being crushed by its weight. I kept our home, I told him quietly. I kept my promise to look after Scarlett. I'm finding my way forward, one day at a time. That evening, as Scarlett and I shared dinner on the patio Edward had built, she handed me a journal I had never seen before. Edward gave it to me for safekeeping months before he died. He asked me to give it to you when the time felt right. I think now was that time. The journal contained Edward's private thoughts about our marriage, his hopes for our future, and reflections on what truly mattered in life. The final entry, dated just days before his death, read, "If love is measured by how it transforms us, then what Aubrey and I share is immeasurable. She has made me better in ways I never imagined possible. Whatever comes next, that love remains my greatest achievement and legacy." Those words became my touchstone in the years that followed. If you've ever faced betrayal from someone you thought you could trust, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. How did you find the strength to rebuild? Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others know they're not alone. Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and share with someone who might need to hear that even after devastating loss, it's possible to reclaim your life and find purpose again. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your story isn't over when tragedy strikes. It's simply turning to a new chapter.